17. The Florence Terrace. Brattleboro, Vermont, USA, 1873. In 1869, J. Estey and Company began to build a new factory, on Burge Street, in Brattleboro, Vermont. By 1873, this factory had been expanded to 8 main buildings. Free reed organs, like the cottage organ, were built in this factory. Shortly before, Estey operated 2 more organ factories, in Brattleboro. One factory was located on Flat Street. Built, 1866. And one Estey factory was located at Main Street Bridge. Built, 1858. In 1869, both old Estey factories were still in operation. There was another free reed organ factory in Brattleboro at this time, but not running by Estey. The Brattleboro Melodeon Company. Built, 1867. So in 1869, 3 large free reed organ factories were running in Brattleboro, Vermont. And another one was under construction. After the new factory at Burge Street went into full operation, in 1873, the old Estey factories were no longer needed. The old Estey factories were taken over by a toy manufacturer. The Estey Organ Company was founded by Jacob Estey. President Jacob Estey lived with his wife, Desdemona, near the factory. Jacob and Desdemona Estey, residents, since 1837. Brattleboro, Canal Street. Jacob and Desdemona had 3 children. Julia, d. 1840 to 1842. Abby, Emily, born in 1842. Abby Emily was married with Levi Knight Fuller. Abby Emily and Levi Knight lived with Abby's parents on Canal Street. But, in 1873, Abby Emily and Levi Knight Fuller moved into their newly built house, further up Canal Street. In 1873, Julius Jacob, Abby Emily's brother, also bought a house in Brattleboro. Julius Jacob Estey was married, with Florence Carpenter Gray, since 1867. They had 3 children. Julius Jacob Estey was secretary and treasurer at the Estey Organ Company. And he was also treasurer of the Brattleboro Melodeon Company for a short time. Thus, 1873 was one of the most important year in the Estey family's history. The new factory on Burge Street was completed with 8 main buildings in 1873. Daughter Abby Emily moved to Pine Heights with her husband, Levi Knight Fuller, in 1873. Son Julius Jacob bought a house in Brattleboro, where he moved with his wife, Florence Carpenter Gray, in 1873. In honor of his wife, Julius Jacob renamed the property to Florence Terrace. The history of the Florence Terrace. In 1852, this property was still undeveloped. This beautiful house was designed in 1853 by Richard Upjohn in the early Italianate style. Richard Upjohn was one of the most famous architects in the United States of the 19th century. Richard Upjohn, British-American architect, born in Shaftesbury, England, emigrated to the United States in 1829. Known for Gothic Revival church buildings, completed several works in the Italianate style. Richard Upjohn designed the house for John Stoddard. John Stoddard was a native of Northampton, Massachusetts. Before the American Civil War, John Stoddard was a wealthy plantation owner from the South. In 1853, John Stoddard built the house for $10,000 as a summer residence for his family. Invested the same amount in the property. Illustrated as J. Stoddard House on the Brattleboro map of 1856. More accurately illustrated in a bird's-eye view map of Brattleboro, also from 1856. In the 1860s, Stoddard sold the property to Captain Henry Devens. Captain Henry Devens, born in Charlestown, Massachusetts, traveled between Boston and China for 20 years as a captain and freighter. In the early 1960s, Devens came to Brattleboro to visit friends at the water cure. Devens liked it so much in Brattleboro that he bought the Stoddard House and other buildings in Brattleboro as well. H. Devens is listed as the owner of the property on the Brattleboro map of 1869. About 1871, Devens sold the house to Henry A. Willard of Washington because he had temporarily go to China for business reasons. Henry A. Willard, born in 1822 in Westminster, Vermont, was the next owner of the former Stoddard House. However, Henry A. Willard sold the house to Julius Jacob Estey just 2 years later. So, in 1873, Julius Jacob Estey and Florence Carpenter Gray moved into this property, which they now called the Florence Terrace. Built 1853, by John Stoddard, designed by Richard Upjohn, in early Italianate style. The Florence Terrace, on the Brattleboro map, of 1876. The Florence Terrace, on the Brattleboro map, of 1886. Julius Jacob and Florence had 3 children. Jacob Gray Estey, Julius Harry Estey, and Guy Carpenter Estey. Guy Carpenter died very young. Brief info: Julius Jacob Estey. Julius Jacob became president of the Estey Organ Company after the death of his father, Jacob Estey, in 1890. He was politically, militarily, religiously, and socially very committed with Vermont. Julius Jacob Estey died in 1902, buried at Brattleboro, Prospect Hill Cemetery. Julius Jacob Estey leaves behind sister, Abby Emily; wife, Florence Carpenter Gray; sons, Julius Harry and Guy Carpenter. After Julius Jacob's death, his sons, Julius Harry and Jacob Gray, took over the management of the Estey Organ Company. And Florence Carpenter Gray lived with son Jacob Gray on Florence Terrace, until Jacob Gray died in 1930. Florence Carpenter Gray outlived her husband Julius Jacob and outlived all her 3 sons. But the Estey organ family business was continued by her grandchildren. Florence Carpenter Gray was strongly committed to the D.R. organization, Daughters of the American Revolution. Florence lived on Florence Terrace from 1873 until 1930. After the death of son Jacob Gray, she closed the house and moved to the Brattleboro Brooks Hotel on Main Street. Florence Carpenter Gray Estey died in 1933 at her niece's home in Cambridge, New York. Buried with her husband, Julius Jacob, at the Estey family plot in Brattleboro, Prospect Hill Cemetery. Florence Carpenter Gray Estey, 1848 to 1933. The Florence Terrace was probably sold after Florence's death. I read about what happened next to the house in a report from the Brattleboro Historic Society. Discoveries at Brattleboro Historical Society lead to Florence Terrace, Dr. Hogle, and Asahel Clapp. The Brattleboro Historic Society states, in 1941, Florence Terrace was owned by Dr. Hogle. Dr. Hogle served as a doctor in the Philippines, Santo Tomas Hospital, during World War II. At Santo Tomas Hospital, he had 2 patients from Spain, who had settled in Manila.
Enriqueta, Michel de Champourcin. María, Michel de Champourcin.
Maria was severely wounded in the leg and hip by a bomb, and Dr. Hogle treated her for some time, but subsequently had to amputate her leg. A small friendship developed, and Dr. Hogle invited the sisters to Brattleboro, Vermont, if they ever came to the USA. And so it come, after the war ended, in 1946, the 2 sisters traveled to St. Louis, in the USA, to have Maria fitted with a foot prosthesis, and then visited Dr. Hogle in Brattleboro. Maria and Enriqueta loved Brattleboro, and Dr. Hogle offered them the Florence Terrace to buy. So,
Enriqueta, Michel de Champourcin,
bought the Florence Terrace from Dr. Hogle around 1946. And in 1948, Enriqueta transferred half of the property to her sister,
María, Michel de Champourcin.
Enriqueta married shortly thereafter, and left her sister Maria alone with the property in Brattleboro. According to Brattleboro city directories, Maria was the sole resident of the Florence Terrace from 1948 until the mid-1950s. But maybe also have rented rooms for several years. According to the Brattleboro Historic Soviety, Maria and Enriqueta were mentioned in the local news in 1957 because they stopped paying the fees for the Florence Terrace. Dr. Hogle, the previous owner, paid the $3,500 in taxes on the property and sued the sisters for repayment. But after that, traces of Maria and Enriqueta Champourcin are lost in Brattleboro. No one pays the taxes anymore, and the Florence Terrace begins to fall into ruin. I was able to find a few sources about
Enriqueta, Michel de Champourcin. María, Michel de Champourcin.
Enriqueta probably married a Hidalgo. The sisters also, probably, owned an estate in Mexico, the Hacienda Dolores, in Porac. Enriqueta were also involved in other legal disputes in Manila, Philippines. The final curtain. Since no one was taking care of the house or paying the taxes anymore, it started to fall into ruins. In the book, Voices of America, Brattleboro Remembers, by the Brattleboro Historical Society, I found a story about the Florence Terrace. Jane Douglas writes that she went to Green Street Elementary School in Brattleboro in the 1950s. The Green Street School was built around 1925, directly behind Florence Terrace, on the former Heinz site. Green Street School, built in 1925, at this spot. Jane Douglas writes that behind this school, there was a place of pleasure, and fear, of forbidden delight, and unspeakable terror. The Haunted House. The Haunted House, view from Green Street School. At that time, the former Florence Terrace house was already an abandoned shell of its former glory. The children of Green Street School told scary stories about the previous owners. Jane Douglas writes that in warm weather, the house was hidden by a patch of wild black raspberries, surrounded by persistent berry bushes with long, straight, thorn-covered branches that arched 5 to 6 feet high and then curved downward. The bushes were crisscrossed by a network of paths formed by the schoolchildren, paths that even led to the house. Broken windows, open front doors, and the last scraps of curtains were visible. Rain dripping through the holes in the roof. Jane Douglas writes that she believes the water droplets were the tears of the house, tears of a house crying for its past. In 1969, the government tried to buy the house for a public housing project. And in 1971, the two sisters, Maria and Enriqueta Champourcin, agreed and sold the Florence Terrace property to the Émile J. Leger Construction Company. The building was then immediately demolished to make way for the public housing project. The Florence Terrace disappeared in 1971 in Brattleboro when the public housing was built on the site. Florence Terrace 3D model. My Florence Terrace 3D model is based on pictures, drawings, and floor plans from different views that I found on the internet. The 3D model corresponds to the side view illustrations and map floor plans. While I was not been able to find any clear views of the south side, I have therefore completed this side according to my imagination.